Fantastic. So welcome everybody to July's Great War Group free online talk. It's our ongoing series. Great to see lots of you who are regular watchers coming back each time. Thank you for sticking with us, and also welcome to anybody who hasn't been along before. I hope you enjoy it, and hope you come back for future talks as well. Most of you all know this is part of Great War Group's ongoing programme of engagement, open to members and non-members alike. And it's really great just to give a showcase to people talking about areas of interest to them, particularly research that they've done. And so tonight we're really delighted that we've got Louise Provan talking to us about The Spy Who Disappeared. By way of introduction, Louise is, I think, probably known to many people within GWG, very active member. She also very kindly runs the social media profile for the group, so is kept very busy. In terms of her First World War background, she's got an MA in military history, which focused on naval reforms of Jackie Fisher. But in fact, since then, she's disappeared down an infamous rabbit hole involving all the events that happened in the Transcaucasian and Transcaspian region during the First World War, and in fact afterwards, particular interest in Dunster Force. And in fact, hopefully we'll hear a little bit later on about the book that Louise is working on currently, which is very exciting, which is due for publication next year. So that's going to be really good. But for tonight, we are going to hear about The Spy Who Disappeared, who's Reginald Teague Jones. So with that, I will hand over to you, Louise.
Thanks very much, Henry. So this is one of the stranger stories of the First World War period, and this is Reginald Teague Jones, a British agent and spy intelligence agent who disappeared. In the 1980s, a chap called David Burnett was working for the publisher Gallant's, and his attention was drawn to this manuscript. It'd been submitted by an elderly man by the name of Ronald Sinclair, who was retired. He was living in Spain, and it was an account of a journey he had taken in 1926 across Central Asia from Beirut to India in a Model A Ford car, which, as you can imagine, at that time was no mean undertaking. Ostensibly, he was a businessman. He was drumming up trade links. David Burnett and Gallant sort of described it as a rather old-fashioned travelogue, but they took a chance on it and they published it anyway. Unfortunately, shortly afterwards, in 1988, Ronald Sinclair died, and his obituary, the task of writing his obituary, fell to David Burnett, and the obituary appeared in the Times newspaper. This obituary was spotted by Peter Hopkirk. Peter Hopkirk was the legendary historian of the Great Game period. And between them, Hopkirk and Burnett went through Ronald Sinclair's papers and discovered that Ronald Sinclair had been an intelligence agent. He'd been attached to MI5, and he had been in Transcaspia and Transcaucasia during the First World War period. So for Hopkirk, this was another piece in this 65-year-old mystery, this jigsaw that he'd been trying to put together. He'd spent decades researching. And in a second obituary that appeared in the Times, Hopkirk revealed Ronald Sinclair's true identity as Reginald Teague Jones, the British intelligence agent who had disappeared in 1923, and at least brought some closure to one of the strangest stories of the First World War. So Teague Jones' story starts during this period known as the Great Game, this sort of titanic struggle of mastery between Russia and Britain over mastery over Central Asia, Persia, Afghanistan, and of course the jewel in the British Empire crown, and that was India. At the beginning of the 20th century, things had simmered down a bit because Russia was otherwise occupied with a lot of internal strife. And in 1907, the Russian Convention had been signed, which divided Persia into spheres of influence, where basically Russia got the top bit, we got the bottom bit, and the middle bit stayed neutral. There was also the constant reconfiguration of strategic powers during the first part of the century, 20th century, where very unlikely alliances were formed, and Russia and Britain found themselves unlikely bedfellows along with France and the Triple Entente. So Teague Jones' story sits right at the heart of this, through these tumultuous events, through the Great Game, through the First World War, and through the Russian Revolution. His upbringing in St. Petersburg in 1900s, posting to Aden 1913, Persia 1917, Transcaspia, Transcaucasia, and then later years when at least we know he was in Persia in the 1920s. Teague Jones was born, right, hang on a minute, there we go. Teague Jones was born in Merseyside in 1889, and he was one of 4 children. His father died when he was 13, leaving his mother to bring up the children alone. So some family friends took young Reginald off to St. Petersburg as a companion for their own son. And there he went to school and became fluent in German, French and Russian. On Sunday, 9th of January 1905, young Teague Jones was walking through St. Petersburg and he came across the Tsar's cavalcade. Unbeknown to the Tsar and to Teague Jones, there was a whole crowd of protesters on their way to try and intercept the Tsar's cavalcade. These protesters, as you can see here, were fired upon by the Tsar's Cossack bodyguard, the Tsar's Cossack army, and Teague Jones witnessed the deaths as the Cossacks charged the protesters down using bayonets. But interestingly, this experience didn't turn Teague Jones revolutionary. He still remained loyal to the British Empire. Young Reginald had an uncle who was in the Indian political service, and it was close, so he joined the political service, no doubt assisted by his uncle, and he was posted next to the infamous northwestern frontier, Afghanistan, where, as far as I can gather, most of his time was actually spent shooting the wildlife rather than getting involved in anything particularly interesting. Then 1913, he was sent to Aden in the fight against slavery and gun running. 1917, he was sent to Persia to assist in the apprehension of the German spy, Wilhelm Wasmus, who was stirring up anti-British propaganda. And at some point, he moved from the Indian political service to the shadowy worlds of intelligence. I'm not quite sure when that happened. So 1918, the final year of the Great War, there were huge threats to the stability of India. The Turks and the Germans were advancing on Baku. The Bolsheviks had held much of Central Asia. And the Russians, who were our allies during the war, had come out of the war as a result of the revolution and were retreating and withdrawing from the area. The Turks and Germans and Bolsheviks all trying to find a way to destabilise Britain, and they all seem to, in their own way, settle on destabilising India as a method of destabilising Britain. The Turks and the Germans were also after the oil of Baku. Under the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, it had been agreed by the Bolsheviks that the Germans were entitled to some of this oil. But as you can imagine, the British were in no hurry to let them have it. So a small mission was sent to this area and also to Persia. Britain at this time was unable to spare many men from the Western Front. This was early 1918, looking at the German Spring Offensive. So to send men away from the Western Front and to this very obscure part of the world was frowned upon by many people. Although these small military missions did go ahead, Churchill was very keen on these interventions, as they were called. The first one I spoke about was Dunster Force, led by Major General Lionel Dunsterville to protect the oil wells of Baku from the Turks and Germans. The second was the Malison mission, sent to Meshet, and their mission was really to counteract Bolshevik propaganda, to protect the Transcaspian Central Asian Railway here, which you can see, and also to sabotage it should the Turks manage to cross. And finally, their they also were tasked with preventing cotton from falling into Turkish and German hands. Cotton, of course, is a key ingredient in the manufacture of cordite. So Teague Jones and others posted to this area sort of noted very much how all the difficulties of operating. The summer temperatures went up over 45 degrees. You had dust storms, few water sources, and well below freezing in the winter. Teague Jones did write about bleached camel bones and dead camels at the side of the roads as he travelled. And as we all know, camels are virtually indestructible, so that just gives you a good idea of how tough things were. And there's a few place names here on this map worth remembering. Obviously, Baku, where Dunstable was sent. North of the Caspian Sea was Astrakhan, which is a Bolshevik stronghold. Opposite Baku, on the other side of the Caspian, was Krasnovodsk, which is a very important port and terminus for the Central Asian Railway. Ashgabat, which was to become the seat of the Transcaspian government eventually. Merv, which is an oasis town. And then Tashkent, which is, again, a Bolshevik stronghold. So both Dunstable and Malleson Mission were very small. Malleson Mission was beefed up with a division of Indian cavalry, 19th Punjabis. But the idea was very much in the same way as T. Lawrence. He harnessed local Arab troops to assist him in destroying the Turkish railway, the Ottoman railways in Transjordan area. The idea here with Dunstable would harness the assistance of the Armenians in fighting off the Turks, and Malleson and Teague Jones would harness the assistance of the Transcaspians. Teague Jones is here, sat in the middle of the Punjabis. But out of the three different operations, only really, I would say, Lawrence had been successful. Dunstable found his Armenians used to just basically run off at the first sign of trouble and were quite happy to leave the British to the fighting. Whereas Malleson and Teague Jones found that their Transcaspians and Turkmen were a bloodthirsty lot and didn't see killing as being a means to an end as much as an end to itself. And they quite like looting as well. Other thing to remember is when I say Turk, I mean Ottoman Turk. On the other side of the Caspian Sea. When I say Turkmen, I mean on the east side of the Caspian Sea. These are the people of what we would now call Turkmenistan. But Turkmenistan didn't exist in the current format then. So Turk and Turkmen, two entirely different things. So Teague Jones' mission was partly to go and look at the Transcaspian Railway and find out where he could sabotage it if the Turks did get across the Caspian Sea. He went up and down the railway, but quickly concluded that there were very few weak spots. It was almost as a railway had been designed with sabotage in mind. And he'd also concluded if he went out there with a bunch of Turkmen, it's more likely he'd be murdered and left for dead. So he wasn't too keen on that idea. So also from Meshed, Teague Jones had gone across to Baku to report to Dunstable and share information. He'd gone up to Ashgabat on the north of the Caspian Sea to find out the lay of the land there, but found that Bolshevik stronghold with a German delegation visiting. So he kind of hot-footed it back to Krasnovodsk. German delegation were actually there to receive cotton, bales and bales of cotton. Teague Jones was determined that this cotton was not going to fall into German hands, so tried to figure out what to do with it. First idea was to set it alight. But as you can see, although these are stock photos, as you can see, Krasnovodsk was full of timber buildings, so setting a load of cotton alight may not have been the best idea if you wanted to retain the town. So he hit on a plan. He had a contact in the telegraph office. And when I say contact, probably somebody in his pay. And this contact was to be in receipt of a telegram from Ashgabat telling them to unload all the cotton off the ships, and to send the ships back to Ashgabat empty. At which point, the telegraph machine was to mysteriously break down, which, as it did on a frequent basis, nobody was any the wiser. So these ships were sent back to Ashgabat and the German delegation empty of cotton. And because the telegraph machine had broken down, and we're talking huge travel distances, it was some time before this could be resolved by the Germans and Bolsheviks. The other picture here is of a armoured train, Bolshevik armoured train. This is a photo was taken in the north of Russia, so this is actually quite a nice example. The ones in Transcaspia were more makeshift. There had been steel shortages, so they were putting whatever they could together to form an armoured train. At one point, one enterprising railway engineer had the idea that they'd use the cotton to pad out the railway carriages and create a bulletproof compartment. Teague Jones was actually offered the opportunity to sit in one of these compartments while they tested it with a machine gun. He declined, and wisely so, because the compartment wound up looking like a sieve by the end of it, because they'd used hand-packed cotton, not machine-packed. But anyway, these armoured trains were actually very important for moving troops up and down, and also in limited circumstances in conflict. Both the Bolsheviks and the Transcaspians had armoured trains, and Teague Jones has a fantastic account where one of the armoured trains from one side would come out from around the embankment, fire on the other and retreat, and then the other one would come out, fire on the other and retreat, and literally no damage was done, but both sides maintained some form of credibility because they were still fighting. It's a really good account. So at the moment, I'm just going to leave Teague Jones there and talk a bit more about the Malison mission against the Bolsheviks. Russia's obviously Britain's longtime enemy over India and Central Asia. First of all, the Russian Empire, and now the Bolsheviks. They were a new threat, slightly unknown quantity at this stage. They were certainly hated by Churchill, who did not trust them at all, called the bacillus of Bolshevism, thought they should be destroyed. So a Malison mission was sent in response to their threat. The mission was to counteract propaganda, as already said, protect the Transcaspian Railway or sabotage it if the Turks had managed to come across, and also defence against any hostile moves on any of the cities or any of the British positions. So on the 12th of July, the Transcaspians actually managed to overthrow the Bolsheviks in various cities, in Baku and in Ashgabat. In Baku, the Bolsheviks, there was 26 Bolshevik commissaires there, and they were overthrown and replaced with what was called the Dictatorship of the Central Caspian. And despite the name, it was run by 5 dictators, but despite the name, these dictators were actually milder Mensheviks and social revolutionaries. In Ashgabat, Bolsheviks were replaced by what was called the Transcaspian government. This Transcaspian government started to receive British backing, so to all intents and purposes, we were now Bolshevik enemies. On the 12th of August, some 3,000 Bolsheviks actually attacked a British position here near Merv, a place called Baramali. Some machine gun detachments of Punjabis had been sent there along with Transcaspian army, but they were outnumbered 3-1 and had to retreat back into Persia. Then after reforming, there was a force of 500 Punjabis and about 1,000 Transcaspians were sent into a place called Caucasus here. And over a series of skirmishes in September, they actually got the upper hand on the Bolsheviks. And it was in one of these skirmishes early September that Teague Jones was actually shot. And he ended up with an injury to the groin, quite a nasty injury. Then in October, Malison's forces managed to push the Bolsheviks right back at Dishak. So they were getting the upper hand. But it was noticeable that Punjabis tended to perform very, very well, whereas the Transcaspians less so. They were unreliable and basically uncontrollable. So pretty much replicated what Dunstable had found, unreliable local troops. But I think it also should be noted 6 months later, the Malison mission was actually withdrawn from Central Asia, and Bolshevik rule did set in then. And to try and get men and arms, these armoured trains were used throughout this. So it was very much, as I said, a railway war. This is a slightly battered example that Teague Jones is laying out. I think it's had a bit of a rough time. But yeah, that was virtually the only way you could get men and arms around that countryside there, because the roads were just so poor. But got to be said, trains were slightly less used in outflanking manoeuvres. So as I said, on the 12th of July, the 26 Bolshevik commissars were overthrown and thrown into the prison. Baku and Ashgabat both fallen to new governments. And by the 14th of September, the Turks had advanced on Baku, and Baku had fallen to the Turks. Dunsterville evacuated the city, and he didn't leave the 26 commissars languishing in prison. He actually put them on a ship and sent them up to Astrakhan, where Bolshevik stronghold, thought they'd be out of trouble, so no problem. Two of Dunsterville's men actually ended up on that ship, and it took him several months to get home, having had quite a few adventures too. But also, this is where things get a bit strange, in that the ship never got to Astrakhan. The ship appeared in Krasnovodorsk, and nobody is entirely sure why. One theory is there was simply not enough fuel on board, so the captain decided Krasnovodorsk was the nearest port he could get to. Another theory was the ship's crew weren't too keen on the idea of going to a Bolshevik stronghold. They weren't happy with that thought. And Teague Jones' own favoured theory was that the ship's captain and crew actually decided to sort of make for Krasnovodorsk and turn the commissars in, basically betray them. So whatever it was, the commissars ended up in Krasnovodorsk. The town commandant was a man named Kuma, and he threw the 26 in prison. So these 26 commissars were now prisoners of the Transcaspian government. However, they were very dangerous prisoners to have. Bolsheviks are notoriously unforgiving. So this is, they had to think very carefully what they had to do with them. And by now, Malison had reached a formal agreement with the Transcaspian government to supply financial and military assistance in return for being allowed to take control of the Central Caspian Railway. So to all intents and purposes, we were now allies with the Transcaspians against the Bolsheviks. Here's a red star marked on this map. Just remember where that is, because that comes into the story a bit later. So the Transcaspians knew these prisoners were dangerous, were not keen on hanging on to them. So they were left with two options, really. One was to get the British to take them. The other was to get rid of them somehow. And none of those options were too great for anyone, really. Option one, the preferable one. On the left there is Stepan Shahumian, who was the leader of the 26 commissars and in the prison in Krasnovodorsk. And on the right is Fyodor Funtakov, who was the president of the newly formed Transcaspian government. And it's here where the waters get a bit muddy and have serious implications for Anglo-Soviet relations and for Teague Jones himself. So on the 18th of September, these prisoners are in Krasnovodorsk in the prison. So Malison and his Colonel Ellis said that they phoned the government in Delhi and requested that the prisoners be sent on to Delhi. Of two reasons. One, that they were big trouble, and sending them off to India would keep them, out of the way. The other was they'd be very, very useful hostages in the event of any hostage exchange for British prisoners taken by the Bolsheviks. So that made sense. And on the 18th of September, Teague Jones notified Malison that there was going to be a meeting with the Transcaspian government where they all discussed what to do. And Teague Jones was instructed to attend. So at this meeting, President Funtikov was there. He was a railway engineer to trade, and he was rarely sober. His nickname was actually Funtikov because he was generally unable to even speak. He was so drunk. His deputy was Krylov and Foreign Minister Zimin. And at the meeting, Funtikov stated that Malleson didn't want the prisoners and Funtikov was to shoot them. So this account was also backed up by William Nash, who was a colonel with that Malleson mission in 1956. He backed this story up, saying that at the time Malleson was actually ill with malaria and had said that the Transcaspian government could do what they like with the prisoners. I don't think he actually said shoot them, but do what you like with the prisoners, and that kind of really only meant one thing. So you have these two different accounts. On one hand, you have Malleson and Ellis saying that they'd told Delhi that the prisoners were to go to India. And on the other hand, Malleson apparently said it was up to the Transcaspian government what they did with the prisoners. And there's probably no way we're ever going to know the truth of that one. However, this meeting that Teague Jones had been instructed to attend with the Transcaspian government went on late into the night. Endless debate, possibly vodka-fueled, I can only speculate on that. But Teague Jones, still suffering from this injury he'd sustained of being shot in battle, he left the meeting early. He was criticised for this, but he was obviously in pain and exhausted, and listening to argumentative drunk Russians probably wasn't high up on his list of priorities. Sorry, drunk Transcaspians. So then the following evening, on the 19th, Funtikov informed Teague Jones that the decision had been made to shoot the prisoners. Krylov had already been dispatched to Krasnovodsk, and the deed was near enough done, if it hadn't already been done. So what happened? Well, again, there's various accounts of what happened. One was from a young Armenian by the name of Anastas Mikoyan. He had actually been on the same ship as the 26 commissars, but for some reason he'd escaped their fate, and nobody's quite sure why. I mean, it could just be as simple as his name wasn't on the list, but Mikoyan, he was very much a Soviet old guard. He'd risen to the highest echelons of this of the Soviets, of the party. He'd survived Stalin's purges, but when Stalin wanted to torment him, he referred to him as the 27th Commissar and always asking him, how did you escape? Implying he was no good. But anyway, Mikoyan recounted that in the middle of the night, the 26 commissars were bundled onto a train and taken away. This was backed up by a man named Durdikin, who was a railway worker. Durdikin was walking along the railway in the early hours of the morning, and he heard a train approach. There was no train due, so he thought it was quite strange, so he hid. And from his hiding place, he witnessed the 26 being bundled out of the train, marched up at gunpoint up the railway embankment, and along the railway embankment, silhouetted against the early morning sky, they were basically executed. Durdikin was actually rumbled. He was found in his hidey hole, and whoever found him sort of decided they'd let him go, just warned him not to tell anyone what had happened. But they obviously changed their mind because a couple of days later, Durdikin's body turned up. So they obviously wanted to silence him. But this was not before Durdikin had managed to tell his village priest. And this is where we get that story from. And I told you to remember where the Red Star was on the railway. This is where this happened. Train was just stopped in the middle of nowhere. The 26 commissars marched up the embankment and shot and buried in very shallow graves. So Teague Jones and Funtikov were very quick to learn what had happened. And obviously the British government were through Teague Jones and Funtikov. Lenin less so. Nobody was in a massive hurry to pass on this particular bit of information. You don't really want to tell Lenin that his Bolshevik commissars have been executed. Malleson telegraphed the Transcaspian government and passed on the British government's absolute revulsion of this act. This should not have happened, and launched something resembling an investigation. But how thorough it was, who can tell? Could Teague Jones have done more to stop this? Should he have left the meeting? Obviously, we have this discrepancy in accounts. Who did Malleson actually speak to in Delhi? Did he speak to somebody in Delhi? Teague Jones actually blamed Funtikov and Kurylov and Transcaspian government for this. But Kuna, the town commandant at Krasnovodsk, decided to claim this for himself. He was quoted as saying, "You see, when I make up my mind, I do it properly. They can never say of me, as they do of the British, that I talk of armies and then I arrive with a batman, a Ford and a general," which a clear dig at Dunsterville. But on the whole, for the British, that was that. Teague Jones was no fan of the Bolsheviks, so no loss, and he was 200 miles away at the time when this happened. They were shot, and it only gets a passing mention in his diary, in his written account. So he obviously didn't really think it was a big deal. So if we roll on to spring 1919, and the Malleson mission's withdrawn. Turkish-German threat is over, and Britain was pretty war-weary and not really keen on Churchill's idea of taking it to the Soviets and starting up another war, basically. So but the Bolsheviks move in. Inevitable results for the Transcaspians, our former allies, who'd overthrown the Bolsheviks the following year. And only then did Moscow and Lenin discover what had happened to the 26 commissars, as the Transcaspian government quite keen to keep it quiet. And Moscow's reaction was explosive. Lenin, for want of a better word, he went absolutely batshit about it. He was furious, immediately went on a hunt for the perpetrators of this terrible crime, and almost immediately decided it was the British. In his mind, that was it. It was definitely the British, and it certainly fitted his narrative. A journalist called Vladimir Shaikin had written a newspaper article naming Teague Jones as the perpetrator of the crime. And Shaikin's chief witness was none other than Funtikov, who by this time was languishing in prison and desperate to save his own neck. Shaikin published a book naming Teague Jones, and this soon became accepted as fact in the USSR. So, at the age of 29, Teague Jones is top of Lenin's most wanted list, which is not really where you want to be. Bolshevik reach was very long. Just ask Trotsky. But obviously not too sure what the modus operandi would be now. Probably no hotel room windows and that sort of thing. But who knows? There was a flood of publications, books, films. There's actually a film called The 26 Commissars by Nikolai Schenkelaya, which it's black and white and interspersed with a plain screen with subtitles. And although it's probably a fascinating study of Soviet propaganda cinema, it is also 3 hours of your life you'll never get back. So I don't recommend it. And then, of course, there's this famous painting by Isaac Brodsky showing the 26 commissars and their executioners. And if you look carefully, there's a few chaps here in British uniforms, and one who bears more than a passing resemblance to Teague Jones next to the guy in the white uniform there. So Britain obviously refuted the charges. British government said, no, this didn't happen. It was nothing to do with us. Teague Jones threatened Shaikin with libel, but it was all to no avail. These 26 commissars were elevated to revolutionary heroes. This huge memorial in Baku was built in their honour. Their bodies were exhumed from the shallow graves by the railway and buried in the centre of Baku. as a footnote, actually, this is no longer in Baku. It's demolished in the fall of the Soviet Union, and the 26 again were exhumed and put in a graveyard, quite a sort of modest-looking graveyard at the edge of Baku. So it's no longer there. Now it's Azerbaijan and not part of Russia. So in May 1923, Reginald Teague Jones changed his name to Ronald Sinclair and disappeared. Little mention of him in Foreign Office files afterwards. So, but to be fair, if you're going to disappear, you're kind of in the right industry for it. Easy one to disappear. But between 1923 and 1988, in the publication of Ronald Sinclair, his book under the name Ronald Sinclair, where was he? And there's, very little evidence. Peter Hopkirk thought he was most likely attached to MI5 in London as part of the Delhi Intelligence Bureau, still fighting Bolshevism, as his expertise would be invaluable. Papers and films belonging to him suggest he made several trips to the Middle East, including the one he'd written about in the book. But nobody's really that clear why he was there. The book obviously has said he was there ostensibly as a trade delegate. But he's also been in Egypt, Kenya, Palestine, Persia, but no explanation. But we do know during the Second World War, he was in New York as Colonel Ellis and his son Peter were there, and Peter had bumped into him. But again, this is an industry where you don't ask that many questions. So again, not clear what he was doing in New York. So Ronald Sinclair retired to Spain and then a residential home on the south coast, south of England, and retained a lifelong fear of communism and communists, terrified of them. When his wife died, he'd managed to get in contact with his first wife. They'd been married in Baku all those years ago and divorced in the early 20s, and he'd somehow managed to contact her or had stayed in touch. And he, at his own expense, paid for her to come and stay at the same nursing home as him, the same residential home. And it was another piece in Peter Hopkirk's sort of jigsaw puzzle, if you like. They both spoke Russian to each other when they were together. And whereas everybody knew Ronald Sinclair as Ronnie, his wife, his Russian wife, Alia, always referred to him as Reggie. But obviously still massive gaps in the jigsaw, and I'm not sure it'll ever be fully completed. But I will leave the sort of final word to Peter Hopkirk, who'd spent a lifetime researching the Great Game, Transcaspian region, and Reginald Teague Jones, the spy who disappeared. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Louise. That was really, really good. So we've had, I think, just the one question come in so far. So if you want to take that one, and then we'll see if anyone else raises a hand. But there was a question from Jan, actually, about your superb maps and where you'd got those from.
Various publications I've got, various books, and archive stuff that I've dug around for. Yeah, I've got quite a file of stuff now. Yeah. I can't remember exactly where I got each one, but I can certainly look it out.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Because I think, for those of us who haven't spent the time studying this area as you have, it can be quite hard to sort of picture exactly where everything is. And in fact, one of the questions I had was sort of to do with the distances. And you said, obviously, that there are huge distances. Could you just give us an idea of what the scale is? So say, for example, how wide the Caspian Sea is if you're crossing from...
3 days on a boat.
3 days?
Well, wow. Yeah. Okay. 2 to 3 days. Well, said about 48 hours, but the weather, I mean, that's now. The weather can be interesting. So, 48 hours-ish.
That's amazing. So to kind of give that a context, so that's wider than the North Sea, say, or...
No, I wouldn't say it's quite as wide as... I'm not entirely sure, actually. Hang on. Caspian Sea. It's maximum, it's saying, 270 miles. So big distance. Yeah. Given that the channel's, 20 miles, 22?
Yeah, I think Dover-Calais is about about 22 miles, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can certainly see from side to side. And then again, and I mean, obviously you probably don't have an exact figure distance for it, but the Central Asian Railway, for example, what are the distances there? You're talking thousands of miles?
Thousands, yeah. You're talking at least 2,500, yeah.
Yeah.
2,000. Yeah.
I suppose those trains wouldn't have been going very fast.
No,
so
no,
several days, if not weeks.
Several days to get across, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I did look at going to don't tell Andy this, but I did look at doing the Caspian Sea, going across, which I think when I did read about it, and all the advice on it was like, don't. But no, it's, I think it's, you can't, that weekend, you think that's a lot to take, Andy.
He's washing his hair that weekend.
He's washing his hair. But no, I mean, it's even now, it's quite an expedition to get across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and I imagine, I mean, there must be kind of long stretches where there's not really much by way of anything in terms of towns.
It's very, very empty, yeah. It's all, a lot of these areas are also on the Silk Road, route known as the Silk Roads, which it was really interesting, actually. I don't know if anyone listens or are members of The Rest Is History. So I was listening to actually an episode of that today, and Tom Holland was interviewing Peter Frankopan, who wrote The Silk Road, and Peter Frankopan said, and nobody will have heard of the city of Merv. I was like, well, excuse me. They're all important trade routes at some point or another in antiquity and much further back, out with my area of expertise. But it's an unknown area for us in the West, really, I think.
Yes, and as you said at the start, in a way, it's absolutely critical because it lies right at the heart of between East and West and North and South. So it really is a kind of
and the control over it was
area.
Just such a massive issue. Obviously, Russia wanted it, the Bolsheviks wanted it, the Turks wanted to spread their own sort of pan-Turkic, pan-Turanian empire. Enver Pasha was actually killed in that area. When I say in that area, a couple of what would be Uzbekistan now. He was killed basically riding into machine gun fire, Turkish machine gun fire. So, Bolshevik machine gun fire.
Yeah. And are there still tensions there between the sort of different ethnic groups and nationalities?
No, that seems to be. I think they're far more authoritarian there as well, though. So I don't know how much information that you're getting, but I don't think it's nothing like the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, which is obviously still rumbling on over Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yes, seems to flare up every few years, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Great. Well, I don't know if you've seen in the chat, there's been lots of really nice comments, so it looks like everyone really enjoyed that. Oh, yeah, classic question. Should have thought of this. So thanks for the prompt there, Jan. Recommendations for reading. Obviously, you've done a lot of work into this, and there's the
I mean, basically, I'll always say anything by Peter Hopkirk. Brilliant. So he's absolutely brilliant. And Teague Jones's own diary is good. And
is that still in print? Is that easy to get hold of?
I don't know. I don't know where I got my copy from. I think it's definitely old. I'm guessing I got that eBay or something. Yeah. So.
Okay, so that might take a little bit of researching there.
Yeah, and it's introduced by Peter Hopkirk. So.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, maybe we could ask GWG's own sort of second-hand book expert, Judith, to keep an eye out in the bookshop for anything coming through.
I mean, some of the books are sort of quite rare, for this area. Actually, sort of mind-bogglingly expensive as well. Don't tell Andy that. Have
you? I'm sure you've looked into it, but places like the SOAS Library at part of University of London School of Oriental Studies, they may have somewhere in their kind of dusty archives.
Okay, I'd have to have a look. Actually, yeah. I mean, a lot of the papers and that I'd gone through for more for Dunster Force than this, but it's been the India office as opposed to anything British. 'Cause, both of these missions, Malison and Dunster Force, to a certain extent, were controlled by India rather than the British side.
Yeah. Great. Excellent. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about the forthcoming book as well, and what people can look out for when that's published next year?
Yeah, sure. It's Osprey Campaign Guide to Dunster Force, and the race oil in Baku, and it's due to be out in August next year. So that's the last thing I'd heard. But yeah, Osprey.
That's
So
great.
which is yeah.
That's very exciting. And how are you finding the writing process? Is it sort of all flowing quite
It's been a
easily?
bit easier now. For a while, it was very stop-start because there's obviously getting to archives and that can be tricky, and there's contradictory accounts. Some of it there was just no account. You've got Dunsterville's own diary, people's diaries, but things that contradict, and no sort of things like dates, times that you would get in maybe more modern conflicts. But especially the Battle of Baku, that I was really, really struggling with. They'd name places and like, where are these places? But I finally kind of tracked down some maps dating from 1918 and war diaries of the North Staffords. 7th North Staffords. So it's coming a lot bit easier now. I can actually, now I've been able to source the information.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel you're really breaking new ground with this, that it's not been looked at with this level of detail before?
Well, I do. There's a couple of people who actually got in contact with me. One is a PhD student in Melbourne, in Australia, and he's writing his PhD on the Australians in Dunster Force. So that'll be interesting to read that when he's done. And I know there's a book out by the former, I think he's BBC correspondent Nick Hyam, and he's got a book out about this region and Dunster Force, and I'm not sure if it covers Malison or not. We certainly chatted about it. His book's out in October, so I'll send everyone a link.
Fantastic.
Well, I'm hoping to go and see. He's doing a talk. I think Doug's going to Gloucester Literary Festival. I know he's there and I can't make that, but I think he's doing a talk in Derby. So I think I'm going to try and make that during the autumn. So I'd certainly like to get in contact with him. I'm really looking forward to his book coming out. Oh, it's sort of trepidation as well, because I'm going to feel right numpty if he's contradicted anything I say and I've got it wrong or something.
But I'm sure you'll complement each other beautifully.
I'm looking for. So I'll send everyone the link. You all must buy it.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Well, that's great. I mean, it's very exciting, and it's clear your passion for the subject and enthusiasm, and all the work you've done really shows very clearly. So thank you for sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
I think everyone's really enjoyed it. Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks very much to Louise for a wonderful talk tonight.